Good evening. Welcome to Q&A. I'm Tony Jones, and answering your questions tonight, financial businessman and pioneer of non-bank home loans, Mark Bouris, the Minister for Mental Health and Ageing, Mark Butler, pop diva, Kate Miller-Heidke, the Liberal member for Higgins, Kelly O'Dwyer, and Labor insider turned commentator, Graham Richardson. Please welcome our panel. Q&A is live from 9:35 Eastern Standard Time and simulcast on News 24 News Radio. Go to our website to send a question now or join the Twitter conversation using the hashtag on your screen. Our first question comes from in the audience. It's from Michael Lemmy.
I've been a faithful Labor voter ever since my 18th birthday. However, the current state of the Labor Party under the stewardship of Gillard and Swan has left me uninspired and feeling rather betrayed by its internal rot, loss of core values and desperate politics. I feel the Labor Party has lost its focus. With polls tracking at all-time lows, how on earth can the Labor Party regain the trust and faith of their once loyal voters?
Graham Richardson.
There's an easy one. I too am dismayed at the current situation because I think there's been so many fundamental errors made so often that it's very hard to maintain the faith. Now, if Labor were down to 1% in the polls, I'd still vote Labor because that's in the DNA. But there are so many people coming to me telling me exactly the same story that you're telling me that it terrifies me. How do you recover? First off, there has never been a time, insofar as I'm aware, when a party going this badly has ever recovered in time for an election. So I don't think there's any possibility of a Labor victory. But I think you should contemplate what happened in Queensland and realise that if you don't vote for Labor and they come back to next to nothing, you have virtually a one-party state. Remembering now that in Queensland, what Labor have got 7 or 8 out of 89. I don't want that to happen federally, and I have no doubt that over time Labor will recover. There's an awful long way to go, and I think the biggest problem that Julia Gillard has now is integrity. She's not seen as having too much of it, and she has to regain that faith and regain it very quickly. And
Graham,
it's nearly impossible.
Graham, it just got worse today. The Craig Thompson affair just got worse at least. How big a mistake was it for Julia Gillard not to move him much earlier to the crossbenches?
Oh, it's one of the very big mistakes. There have been many, but that's huge. I mean, at least a year ago he should have gone. It's not a matter of saying, just maintaining there's a presumption of innocence. Of course there is. But the idea of standing aside because you're in all sorts of strife is hardly new. And in his case, going to the crossbenches was always obvious. I couldn't understand why it wasn't done a long time ago. I told people do it, but people just
Well, according to the Prime Minister, it was done when a line was crossed.
That was a great line, that one. That was a great line, that one. I winced when I heard that. I mean, there was no line crossed in the last year. I don't think... For instance, today, I don't think we learned anything new about Craig Thompson. Everything that's in that report has already been published. It's every misdemeanour, however big or small, has always been printed. And so you know all there is to know. And she's known all there is to know for a long, long time. He should have gone ages ago. And then, of course, the line was also crossed with slipper. On the Thursday in Istanbul, a slipper can come back. On the Sunday at press conference, he can't come back. And she can't explain what line there was and what crossed it. So it was just another awful press conference. And it's the last chance she's got. If she does any more of those, I don't think she'll last.
Mark Butler.
Yes.
Well, I'll take you to the question as it was asked. You are considered to be a rising young star in Labor's ranks. And when you hear people like that gentleman up there who voted Labor since he was 18, totally demoralised, how does it make you feel?
Well, it makes me feel terrible. I don't often agree with Graham, and I disagree with much of what he just said. But when Labor supporters talk like that, it's an extraordinary burden on your shoulders. And you can't sugarcoat polls that are stuck around 30% or a little below 30% at some stages in a primary vote. I don't think that the achievements that we've made for this country over the last 4 years and the vision that we have for the country in future years is denied or rejected by the Australian people. I just think we've been less than good at effectively communicating that, and we have to do much, much better. There are parts of our policy agenda that I think are contested in the population. Some of them, particularly the carbon pricing regime, are very significantly contested, subject to what I think is a very radical scare campaign, and I think over time that will come out. But, reasonable people can disagree about that. What is clear to me is that we are not communicating our agenda as effectively as we can be.
Speaking of the communications agenda that you're talking about, is it clear to you what line was crossed a week ago in the Craig Thompson matter?
Well, I mean, I think both Thompson and Mr Slipper are subject, in a legal sense, to a presumption of innocence, and neither, as far as I know, have yet been charged with anything. And a number
but is it clear to you what line was crossed? Because that's the Prime Minister's rationale for sending him to the crossbenches, suspending his party membership.
But I think at the end of the day, the Parliament is not a legal forum; it is a political forum, and I think the Prime Minister rightly reached the view that the public confidence in Parliament was being so tarnished that the legal position about presumption of innocence needed to become subordinated to the political position. The overriding political objective of a Prime Minister and all parliamentarians is to maintain the public confidence of the Parliament, even a Parliament that is as difficult as this one is, being a hung Parliament, and that, I think, is the line that the Prime Minister saw was crossed. Mark
Bouris, let me bring you back to what the questioner asked. How on earth can the Labor Party regain the trust and faith of once loyal Labor voters?
Well, it's interesting because I was looking at some of the stuff that the Treasurer's been talking about in relation to the budget coming up tomorrow night, and there seems to be a clear line of starting to run the class discussion, the working class discussion, and that is Labor starting to represent the working class again, and trying to rebuild the force of people who've always voted for them in the past. And to some extent, I feel as though Labor's actually lost a bit of that connection with the working class. So I actually think that there's probably not a bad process to start, and they've got a bit of time to do it, I guess, a year, and if they can work on withdrawing on the stimulus out of the system, then maybe interest rates might go better and people might start to feel a bit better about their mortgage, and maybe they could sort of win back some sort of vote, not win the election, but win back some sort of vote and not get absolutely annihilated.
Kate Miller-Heidke.
Yeah, well, the gentleman described Julia Gillard as uninspiring, and I think that's kind of an understatement. She's crushingly disappointing on all sorts of levels. Like, I mean, I was really excited when she got in, first female Prime Minister and all that, and I just don't think I've ever heard anyone speak that comes across as so morally vacant. She's just like a blank canvas. I want to have faith in my leader. I want to see someone that inspires me, that speaks with passion and moral conviction and believes what they're saying. Like, I mean, a case in point is the whole gay marriage thing, and she's an atheist. What the hell reason does she have not to support gay marriage? It's been totally disingenuous.
Kelly O'Dwyer, it's a bit of a free kick for you, I will admit, but you should get in on this question.
Well, look, I think it's a very good question, and I think probably the points that Graham raised, I would agree with them in total, because he goes to the core of the issue, which is that the Prime Minister fundamentally lacks integrity. And Tony's quite right when he asks, what was the line that was crossed just recently when this investigation has been going on into Craig Thompson for over 3 years now? I think we have, in fact, learnt some new things tonight. The report was actually dumped at 5:45 tonight by the Minister, and it was a 1,100-page report. On 900 of those pages, there were a number of allegations regarding Craig Thompson. Allegations with respect to his spending on his credit card, allegations about the use of escort services, $6,000 worth, allegations about the fact that he used $70,000 of union money, HSU money, members' money, to in fact pay for his own campaign for the seat of Dobell. And let's not forget, there are union members here who have actually paid $600, 77,000 of them, workers who work incredibly hard for that money, who are some of the lowest paid workers, who contribute to the HSU. And our view is that those people deserve to be treated with integrity and respect. The Prime Minister is prepared to, in fact, remove Craig Thompson from the Labor Party caucus, but she still thinks it's all right to take his vote in the Parliament.
I'm just going to interrupt your flow because I've got a question on this subject, and I'll come to that and we'll just get a little more comment on this. Mimi de Roy is the questioner.
Yeah, we've all read with interest what's happening with Murdoch in the paper and how he has been deemed by an inquiry to be unfit to run a global company. But in our own backyard, the ALP have also turned a blind eye to the corruption in the unions, and especially the HSU as is coming out now. And I feel that they've disrespected the union members because they've been living high on their money, and they're meant to be their advocates.
Graham Richardson, I mean, you've obviously heard this idea filtering through everywhere in the media and from the public.
Every day. Look, I think I don't agree with you about the inference that this corruption is in some way widespread in the union movement. I don't think it is. My father was a union official. I don't think he'd have taken 50 cents that he wasn't entitled to. But you had this hitherto unknown scale of pillaging of union funds. Now, I knew Michael Williamson. I was one of those who was happy when Craig Thompson was nominated. I thought it would all be good, because none of us had any idea of what was going on. You know, I didn't know what Michael Williamson's assets were. How would you? I didn't know what he was getting paid, or that you know, he owned the IT company that was doing the work for the union, or that his wife was the head of the secretarial company. I didn't know any of this, and I don't think anybody else did.
Except when he was re-endorsed to run again in Dobell.
Well, I'm talking about Michael Williamson.
Right, okay, well, I'm
last time I looked, didn't run for Dobell.
No, you're quite right. Craig Thompson, however...
No, I'll get to that. But I think in terms of the union corruption, by the way, Michael Williamson makes Craig Thompson look like a piker. He's way in front, right? He's out in his own. And I think that those of us in the Labor movement just didn't know it. And it's come as big a shock to us as it has to you. So I don't blame the Labor Party on that score, because no one knew. However, it has been obvious for at least 2 years, maybe you could argue 3, but it's certainly at least 2 years, that something was seriously wrong, and it shouldn't have taken 2 years to act.
And Craig Thompson's nomination in Dobell, because, I mean, the ALP must have some blame for this, since they knew or had a pretty fair idea of what the allegations were circling around his head.
I was trying to avoid the question, but I did say that for at least 2 years, and that would take the last election into account. And so perhaps it was the case that he shouldn't have been endorsed. But of course, you've got to remember that Craig Thompson, I think, has rewritten everything in his own head and actually believes he's entirely innocent. I actually think he actually believes it. And so maybe he convinced people that was the case, because he's pretty good at it.
Well, he's certainly claiming that these are allegations, he's going to fight them, so we're going to stick with
him
innocent until proven guilty.
He'll have to convince a jury at some stage, I suspect, so he'll get practice.
Can I just ask a question, though, Graham? How can the union not have known? I mean, why was the governance so lack that people didn't know, didn't pick this up? We're talking about millions of dollars here. We're not talking about a couple of cents. We're talking about wide-scale rorting of the union members.
And we will take that as a comment, because the questions come from the audience or from me, so I'll go to Mark Bouris.
Well, one of the things, what I don't understand is, how is it that organisations like mine, which is listed on the public stock exchange, and I'm a director, and I'm responsible for everything that happens in my organisation. I've got to know what every one of my directors is doing, because I got voted in by shareholders. How is it that union officials who get voted in by their constituencies, and by the way, including members of Parliament, who are managing money, managing the progress of their particular union, how is it they're not accountable equally to, say, someone like myself?
You're saying they should be subject to corporate-style laws?
Yep, they should be, and every single other member at the senior level should be responsible for they shouldn't be allowed to say, look, I didn't know about it. They should be, someone should be saying to them, well, you should have known about it. You should have made it your business to know about it, because you have a responsibility to the people who voted you in.
They did know about it.
I want to hear from Mark Butler on this, because some speculation already that there may be some easing of the ALP's objections to these kind of ideas. Tony Abbott has called for this.
Well, I think there will be. I think Bill Shorten's already indicated that.
He hasn't indicated exactly what he's talking about. Do you have a better idea?
No, I don't.
Well, let me just ask you then, as a matter of principle, should union officials be subject to the same sorts of corporate laws as company directors?
Well, I think what's clear is that the provisions in the Act now, which are not provisions we introduced, they're provisions that were put in by the last government, haven't been able to deal with what has been quite an appalling breach of faith by this particular union. And I think what Minister Shorten has said is a couple of things. Firstly, that the Fair Work Australia investigation took far too long. It appears pretty clear to me that Fair Work Australia is not set up to deal with this sort of complex investigation that's just undertaken, and we're going to look at the Act about what we can do to improve that. But secondly, the compliance...
Would that include the very thing that I just asked you about?
Well, I don't know. What's happened is, as I understand it, Fair Work Australia has referred this matter to KPMG for a couple of months to advise on what better processes should be available to Fair Work Australia or an equivalent tribunal General, and we'll have a look at that to propose some legislative change.
Would you be comfortable with corporate laws governing what union officials do?
Well, look, that's really a matter for Bill Short, and we should have a look at that. But what's also clear is that the disclosure and the transparency provisions of the Registered Organisations Act, which again have been in place for some years, haven't been able to pick up this appalling breach. I want to echo what Graham said. This is something I've never... I mean, you hear about this in American unions from time to time in the old mob days. This is a level of feathering your own nest that I've never heard of in this organisation. Michael Williamson, in the Australian Union Movement, sorry. I mean, Michael Williamson runs a union that is equivalent to the one I ran in South Australia, looking after aged care workers, childcare workers and so on. He gets paid about 5 times what I got paid for running pretty much the equivalent trade union, leaving aside all the board fees.
And he's still evidently still a director of a credit union as we speak.
How this happened, I think, does require some significant... Well, that's a matter really for the authorities in New South Wales. I wasn't aware of that.
What's your opinion?
But, well, yes, I mean, I just think this fellow should not be part of the Labor movement. But really, that's not a matter for me as the Minister for Mental Health and Ageing.
He was the federal president.
Yeah.
Federal president
I think
in 2009, when you were on the National Executive. I mean, this idea that people didn't know is just beyond belief. The idea that people had no idea that this was true.
That might be your view, Kelly. That might be your view, Kelly.
But
this was a
Will the Prime Minister say that she didn't know? Was she going to actually stand up and say, I did not know, my staff did not know, I've not been told. For 3 years while this investigation was taking place, I had no knowledge of these events, neither did any minister in the government. I mean, let's be pretty categorical about it, because people are trying to now fudge it. They're trying to pretend too little too late that they didn't know what was going on. And Tony Abbott was right when he said the same corporate governance standards should apply to unions, whether they be trade unions, to industry associations, as they do to companies. And he came out and he made that positive policy announcement not long ago.
Well, it sounds like they might be moving in that direction.
But let's be clear, the provisions that govern what has happened here in the HSU were put in by Tony Abbott when he was the Minister for Workplace Relations.
Well,
I'm going to interrupt because we could go all night on this. If you would like to continue the discussion, check out the Q&A Facebook page. Our next question tonight comes from Louise Jakes.
As Parliament resumes tomorrow, Australia will heave a collective sigh at the thought of more tiresome leadership speculation, maximum bickering and minimum policy. Does the panel believe tomorrow's budget will be enough to convince this disillusioned electorate, or will it send them running further?
Kate Miller-Heidke, you want to start with that? I mean, are you looking forward to the budget, and do you think it's in some way going to change the way you feel?
I'm so fascinated by the budget. I don't think I'm going to sleep tonight, really. I don't know, wasn't Wayne...
Believe me, there will be people who don't.
Really? Well, I don't know.
Including the Treasurer.
Yeah, the Treasurer. Wasn't he, voted the best Treasurer in the world or something? Wayne Swan?
So you have very high hopes for tomorrow?
Well, if that doesn't save Labor, the fact that he's the best in the world, I think one budget doesn't have much of a chance. I don't know.
Let's go to Graham Richardson. How big an issue is this budget? Can it save Labor?
Well, I don't know what's in it yet, but I suspect...
I've seen quite a bit of it already.
If you're going to get back to a surplus, I think there's going to be some nasties in it that'll make it very difficult. But the question is, who's listening and who cares? I mean, Mark Butler sits here. I think it's only 2 weeks since he outlined an aged care policy, which I thought was terrific. It disappeared in about 10 minutes. And no one here, I'll bet, could remember what was in it.
No, but we will be talking about it later, so don't go too far down the track.
But people don't focus, and I think that's the problem. When you're on the nose, as Labor is at the moment, then it's very hard to get anyone's attention because no one's listening. And poor old Wayne Swan sits there, works 20-hour days to work up a budget. When he announces it, I mean, I hope someone's listening, but I'm really doubtful that they're going to. I think leadership speculation will still dominate the next couple of weeks far more than whatever's in the budget.
Something about glass houses there, Graham. I mean, when's the last time you wrote a story about a policy rather than leadership intrigue? I mean,
when was the last time you had one that was worth writing about? I mean, that's
2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I was accepting the flattery of the aged care policy. It was a substantial policy. It went nowhere because there is a significant body of the commentariat now that just write intrigue. They don't write policy. They just write intrigue, sort of like modern-day Madame Defarge sort of sitting there knitting and gossiping in the front row, waiting for the next leader to be sort of pulled up to the guilotine.
Well, we've
got to find...
You did actually pull one of those leaders up to the guillotine, kicking and screaming yourself, it has to be said.
No, I don't know.
Not you personally.
You might want to check back on the record there. But
no, not you personally. But what I'm saying is the party guillotined a Prime Minister. People haven't forgotten that.
Well, look, I think part of the problem here is that a significant part of the commentariat, this has become a blood sport, and too many MPs are dancing to its tune and feeding the beast. We've got to get beyond this idea that when things get tough, you throw another leader overboard and see whether a new leader will fix things. I mean,
why, because it didn't work last time?
Well, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I mean, and it's not just the Federal Labor Party that's been doing it. State Labor governments have been doing it. The Liberal Party went through 4 leaders in a bit over 2 years until Tony Abbott. We had the same speculation about the Federal Liberal Party there for a while. I mean, this is not something peculiar to the Federal Labor Party.
Well, you may well be right when you say it just doesn't work, but that indicates it just didn't work getting rid of Kevin Rudd.
Well, look, there has been too lackadaisical an approach. I'll take that as a comment, Tony. Look, leadership change...
I'd rather see you fight your way out of it.
Politics in Australia is too easy to move to the question of leadership change when there is a difficult policy matter before the federal parliament or state parliaments. I think we've lost our intestinal fortitude to work through difficult periods of polling, difficult political debates about major economic reforms like carbon pricing, like dealing with the very substantial policy challenges that come with the ageing of the population. You know, whenever something tough happens and the polls go down, they're published every 2 weeks or so, and commentators say, well, you've got to get rid of a leader and see whether a new face will be able to present this difficult policy dilemma a little bit more attractively. Too many of us dance to that tune.
Yes. Mark Bouris.
He agrees.
What's the question?
We were actually talking about the budget and whether that could actually convince a disillusioned electorate that Labor's okay after all.
Well, I don't think the electorate really understands the difference between surpluses and deficits for a start. I don't really think the electorate understands all the various assumptions and inputs that go into building a budget, and therefore I don't think it's going to make much difference. I think what the electorate wants to know is what I'm going to get out of the budget. In other words, am I going to get something that's going to help me survive for the rest of the year? Am I a small business owner? Am I going to get something to help my business get going? Am I a mortgage holder and is going to do something about my mortgage? Am I a retiree who's got my money in the bank and I'm earning money deposit? Am I going to be able to retire comfortably? That's what the electorate's after, not whether or not the budget is balanced, not balanced, surplus, deficit. In this particular budget, it seems to me, from what we've seen so far, it would seem to me that enough has been leaked out to sort of show it's an attempt to build a surplus, which the IMF is going to give it a big tick to, but really at the end of the day, when you distill it down, it doesn't really help many people in the next 12 months.
OK, we've got a person with their hand up the back there. I'll quickly go to you.
Well, I've heard the word surplus bandied around many times since Julia Gillard has become Prime Minister. My question is, why is it so important for there to be a surplus now when there hasn't been one in the last couple of years? That's my question.
Well, let's hear Mark Bouris on that.
Well, that's a very good point. There's the political debate about surplus versus deficit, and that is sort of the Liberal guys are going to get stuck into the Labor guys because the assumption is that Labor doesn't know how to manage economies, and if you run a deficit, that's sort of evidence, prima facie evidence that you don't know how to run an economy. That's it. Labor, you're no good. So what Labor's decided to do is to prove Liberal wrong. We can run an economy, we can build a surplus, like the Liberal Party did prior to Labor getting in. That's sort of the political debate. Whether or not we need a surplus today, this year, I don't know whether that's really would be economic commentators or economists would be divided on that today. A surplus is good because it builds up your reserves to be able to deal with future economic shocks like the one we had during the GFC. The issue is there any future economic shocks on the horizon? May well be, may well not be. The question is, at home, do we need to build a surplus and therefore extract money out of the economy and sort of take the stimulus out of the economy and make people suffer a little bit? That's the issue today. I don't know the answer to it. I'm not privy to what
let's see if the Minister knows the answer to it.
Well, look, orthodox economic policy says that while things are going bad in the economy, the government should help stimulate demand through a deficit. And things have been going bad since 2008 when Lehman Brothers collapsed. Then when things are going very well, you should build up a surplus for a rainy day. And when things are approaching trend, you should have pretty much a balanced budget or a modest surplus, which is about where we are now. The Reserve Bank and the IMF are saying that we're returning to around trend growth, so that we should, on an orthodox economic policy, be returning the budget to surplus. But I think also there are other reasons why we should be doing this. The IMF said this morning that we should look at returning our budget to surplus to create a buffer again in the event of another future economic shock in the globe.
They didn't say that about us. They said surplus is good for that reason. They didn't say Australia should do that.
Well, in the Fin Review they did this morning.
No. That's not what I read.
Okay, well we read them differently. Also, but also there is this view that it's either surplus or social services. As a social policy minister whose job is really to spend money, not to save it, on mental health, on ageing and other things, the longer you delay a return to surplus, the more you delay being able to do new social policy things like more mental health reform, like NDIS, the disability reform, like new health expenditure.
Right. I'm going to interrupt you there because our next question is sort of on this topic about whether money should be just given away or used for the purposes that you're talking about. It's from Anya Keegan.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the proposed $820 gift to parents of high school students could not maybe be better spent in an underfunded education system?
Graham Richardson.
Oh, look, I just don't know the answer to that. I don't have enough facts and figures on me to give you an answer. I think it's a much better way of giving out the amount of money they're going to give out anyway, because the idea of getting rebates on your tax wasn't working too well, and so it didn't have a big take-up rate. So a lot of people who needed that money to look after their kids weren't getting it. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a better and more efficient way of doing that. But as for the broader education argument, I'm not certain. Labor has actually put more money into education. That's one thing I don't think the harshest critic could actually take away from them. So I think they've been doing a reasonable job on that. But whether they needed to do more, I mean, you could go through any single thing they're going to announce in the budget and say, you should have spent that on education, you should have spent that on health. It's always a matter of choices, and when you're sitting there in government, the choices are always 50-50. You can argue a good case either way.
Kelly O'Dwyer.
Well, I am going to be a little bit critical of what you just said, Graham, as you would expect.
It's a shock.
Because it's not just a matter of spending money, it's the quality of that spend as well. You actually have to deliver outcomes for the money that you spend. And we, as politicians, actually have a responsibility, because that's taxpayers' money. That's money that has been
interrupt there. Is it clear that you're going to oppose this payout?
Well, I'm talking broadly, firstly, about this idea that more has been spent, more has been spent on education.
Money into people's pockets. Are you going to oppose it?
I'm very happy to answer that in just a minute. But if you actually look at the fact that they say that they've spent more on education, well, it's been on building halls, and we've already seen that there has been over $8 billion that has been wasted in the school halls project. We have seen mismanagement of taxpayer dollars, and this is why we say you actually need to look at the quality of spending, not just simply shoveling money out. Now, on this issue of the $800 handouts, we know why the government's actually bringing this forward. They're bringing it forward so they can include it in this budget. It's because they know that very shortly, as of the 1st of July, every single family, every single individual, every single business is going to be hit by the carbon tax, and they know that that is going to hurt. It is going to add to their cost of living.
This payout of money into people's pockets?
Let's look at the whole of the budget as it's actually delivered tomorrow, because at the moment what you're asking me to do is to respond to it piecemeal. What we need to do is actually look at not just what Labor says, but what they actually deliver, because guess what, Tony? Sometimes it's a little bit different. And just because they have put forward a number of different leaks into the paper, you need to look at the detail when it comes to Labor, and you need to actually hold them to account. So I'm not going to make any preemptive statements as to what it is that we might do. We will look at the detail, but one thing is certain, this talk about delivering a surplus, let's be really real here. I mean, if you believe in this surplus, you believe in pixies at the bottom of the garden, because Wayne Swan has been promising a surplus for his last 4 deficits, which have added up to, by the way, $167 billion. So Wayne Swan has delivered 4 deficits that add up to $167 billion. He's promising a surplus now, but that surplus, we won't know if that's going to be delivered until 16 months'
we can all accept
from now.
that the period you're talking about is right through the global financial crisis where many countries went to the wall.
Well, not all, but we started in a very different position, Tony, and this is the fundamental point.
But you didn't have to deal with the global financial crisis.
But we had repaid back $96 billion.
Just that simple fact?
I accept that we needed to spend some money during the global financial crisis, but what this government did was it splurged a lot of money, and I think most economic commentators would in fact agree with me here.
Okay, so, good. We've got that point. Mark Bouris.
I actually don't agree with you. I actually think, I'm sorry, I don't agree with you. I think during the GFC, I think the Labor Party actually did an excellent job in managing us through that GFC period. And I will say that in terms of the financial stability environment, the financial stability of our banks, we can boast the most financially stable banks in the world. So we're in pretty good shape. The question is, what is phase two? So phase one was GFC period, managing the GFC, spending a lot of money, spending all the surpluses that the Liberal Party had gained over all those years. The question is, where do we go from now? And Mark said earlier, during good times, you build surpluses to build against shocks. During bad times, you go into deficit to sort of dig our way out of it. The question right now for me is, are we in good times or are we in bad times? So the assumption is that we are in good times because the Reserve Bank said we're going to grow 3.25% next year, next 12 months, and the Treasury's accepted that number. When you look at that 3.25%, a lot of that is weighted towards the mining boom. If you look at 85% of the population, the small businesses, for example, manufacturing, tourism, retail are doing it really tough. Even the employment numbers are starting to look a little bit softer, not on average, but in places like Victoria, which is the manufacturing heart of the country, places like New South Wales, whereas they do very well in Perth. So my point is, take away the overall position of the country. Are there certain things that we should be doing in our environment instead of going into surplus? Are there certain things we should be doing, maybe just having a small deficit, just to try and kick-start the economy through one more year of surviving after the GFC? That's my view.
Well, I'll go to Mark Butler now, and I wonder, because the question was about the cash into people's pockets, do you see that as a sort of part of a second wave of stimulus?
Well, can I just answer one of Mark's points? I mean, I don't think we say things are going really well and we should be in a position of building up very large surpluses in the way you would if you were growing the economy well above trend. We are returning to around trend growth, and if we're going to deliver a surplus tomorrow night, it will be a very modest surplus. So it's certainly not about building big surpluses up as if things were going swimmingly well, because there is significant pressure on parts of the economy, as you've said.
A small surplus.
It will be modest. Modest. It will be a modest surplus, I think. But look, the cash, the school kids bonus is for anyone who deals with the pressures of kids at school, is a substantial cost of living issue. Education expenses are one of those expenses that continue to climb at about 5% per year and have been for many, many years. Parents on low to middle incomes, the family tax benefit A parents, who are the families who are going to get this bonus, have very significant cost of living pressures through this. Now, we tried it through a typical education tax refund. That's not working. This is a sort of a deregulation type process of the type that Ken Henry's group recommended that we do. I frankly don't understand why the Liberal Party just doesn't get on board with this. This is a substantial cost of living issue for low to middle income families, and it's, I just think, a no-brainer.
Okay, I'm going to go to our next question, which is on a related issue. It's from Adam Wazzell.
Hi, my question to the panel is, do you think that public sentiment regarding the government could substantially improve after the carbon tax is introduced? If it does go smoothly, will it leave Tony Abbott in a weaker and discredited position, given that he so strongly stated that entire industries could disappear as a result of this great big tax?
Kate Miller-Heidke.
Yeah, I think that is exactly what's going to happen. It's going to be just like the GST was, which is going to be, the end of the world, and people were going to be poverty-stricken all of a sudden, and I think it's going to be kind of a non-event.
So you're not looking forward to the budget, you're looking forward to the great big new tax?
No, I don't really care about either of them, to be honest. Sorry.
I'll go to Graham Richardson.
Well, I do. I do care about them. I think I'm a believer in climate change, so I do believe there should be an ETS. I think a $23 carbon price is a joke. It's probably 3 times what the world price is at the moment, and I don't believe you can maintain a fiction for too long. So if I were running the show, I'd certainly be introducing an ETS, say in the next year. I'd rejig the compensation, and I'd get us a policy that would do something about climate change, but that was real and that some way recognised what's happening in the rest of the world.
By the way, that is from his position as a challenger. Kevin Rudd said he would do. Is it something you would now urge the government to do, to follow the advice of the man they got rid of?
No, well, not only he. I mean, I've been saying that for 6 months. So I think people have been... There's quite a number of people have been saying it. The government has just studiously ignored it. I just hope at some point they do something about it. I know they've done some work on whether or not they can change. I don't know the results of that work, nor do I know what decision they're about to make. But I don't think you can maintain a fiction, that's all.
Mark Butler.
Well, I mean, we tried rollback on the GST. It didn't work. This is the mother of all rollback campaigns that Tony Abbott is preparing to undertake after the 1st of July. You know, I don't think, and I certainly hope, that it's not going to work. I don't agree with Graham about the policy. I mean, I think our compensation arrangements are well designed. Low to middle income families, particularly pensioners, who are a significant part of my responsibility as the Minister for Ageing, will be more than compensated for the price impact of the carbon price.
So can I just ask you the obvious question? Could you just explain to us in a few short sentences why it was necessary to get rid of an emissions trading scheme, a market-based scheme that you even convinced the other side of politics to go with, and replace it with a carbon tax, which has a price way out of kilter with the rest of the world?
Well, it's a fixed price leading into a market trading scheme. It's not a permanent carbon tax until 2015.
That's right.
So what's that? 3 years. It's a fixed price to allow the market to adjust to a price and not jump all over the place like we've seen in some other places. I think the $23...
But you had already developed an emissions trading scheme that didn't require a 3-year fixed
And we also
price.
couldn't get it through the Parliament because, you know, the Green Party wouldn't support it, and although the Liberal Party under Malcolm Turnbull initially supported it, they changed their view once Tony Abbott became leader. I mean, that's history. We tried to get it through the Parliament twice.
So the essence of this discussion, I suppose, is whether or not it was the Greens that forced your hand and made you stick with a 3-year fixed price with a very high carbon price.
Well, on one perspective it was the Greens Party, on another it was the coalition. Either way, we couldn't get a majority through the Senate. If we'd been able to get the deal through that Malcolm Turnbull brokered with us, then we'd have the sort of ETS we were looking at back in 2010. But the $23 that Graham talks about, I think, I mean, if you deal with household compensation, I think we have, then that shouldn't be a factor. We'll see after the 1st of July that with the increase in the tax-free threshold to $18,000 and the changes to pension arrangements, that people will be more than covered in the low to middle income household area. And for trade-exposed industries, although it's headline a $23 per tonne price, they're getting about 95% of their permits free. So in actual fact, it's around a $1, $1.50 per tonne actual price, given that they're getting 95% of their permits free.
OK, well, you have talked about this a bit, so if you keep your answers short, because we've got other questions.
Sure. Well, I mean, the obvious question, though, in response to what Mark has just said, is why are you doing it then? If you've got all these free permits and all the rest of it, why, in fact, are you actually doing it if it's not going to create a global difference to carbon emissions? And the fact is, you are doing it because the Greens have forced your hand. $23 a tonne is their starting price. You're actually going to increase that. It's going to go up each year for the next 3 years. We've already heard that Christine Milne would rather it be $40 a tonne. And yet, around the rest of the world, as Graham points out, it's less than $10 a tonne. And in fact, there are recent reports that were released today that says it's more likely to go to something like $4 a tonne for those that actually have carbon pricing schemes, and there aren't too many countries. So why on earth would we be sacrificing Australian jobs and put ourselves at a competitive disadvantage by imposing a carbon tax on our own economy? You're absolutely right to say that this is going to have a very significant impact on our economy. It absolutely will. It will see the destruction of industries, it will see the destruction of manufacturing and of jobs.
And to go to that questioner's point, if it does not do those things, if industries are not destroyed, if masses of jobs are not lost, what then?
Well, I think, unfortunately, Tony, and I take no joy in this, and I think, in fact, it's a terrible thing. I think we're going to see that. And unfortunately, for those of us who actually get out and about in our communities and who also travel the country and talk to people about this issue, we know it's going to have a very direct impact. I had a mobile office meeting in Ashburton only the other day. I talked to a local small business that employs 11 people. They have actually said to me they have calculated the impact of the carbon tax, and they are most likely going to close their doors. They have already said that there are a number of glass manufacturers, 3 of which that they know, and they've said that they're about to close their doors. So I think, Tony, unfortunately, what we're going to see here is a very real impact. This is not fictional. This, unfortunately, is going to impact people, their lives, their families and their futures, and that's why it's an absolute travesty.
All right, we're going to move on to other topics. You're watching Q&A where you ask the questions. The next question comes from Erin Howard-Gillis.
My question is in relation to the aged care plan. How does the government plan to accommodate in what will be an increasing demand for psychogeriatric care? Current acute mental health wards are overflowing and medical wards are under enough pressure with patient loads. Surely keeping these people in their own homes, as has been suggested in some of the discussions, is not an option.
Mark Butler.
Look, thanks for that, and I think you're right. There are, although the driving theme of the aged care reform package we announced a couple of weeks ago was to give older Australians as many options to stay in their own home for as long as possible, there are going to be people either right at the end of life as they become very frail, or people who have cognitive needs like psychogeriatric issues who do need residential care. So although we've talked a lot about supporting people staying in their own home, we will still need a very high quality and growing residential care sector, both for people who become physically frail, for people who experience dementia, and increasingly for people who might also have some psychogeriatric needs. There are some changes in the package that create a new very high supplement for people with behavioural issues in the funding instrument, and you should look at the website to get a bit of an idea about that. It's essentially a $15 a day additional supplement, but we have listened very carefully to a number of people from the sector who've been arguing the case for that part of the population.
Let me ask you just a quick follow-up. There is a big program underway to both upskill and increase the wages of low-paid workers who care for old people. Have you calculated into the future what percentage more people will be able to stay in their homes?
Look, we haven't. But what we're trying to do is give people as many options as they possibly can. But
so
we need.
Is the thrust of it just to keep them out of residential facilities and hospitals for as long as possible? Is that right?
Well, that's the thrust of it, because that is what older Australians have told us they want. I mean, I met with over 4,000 older Australians in the last few months of last year, and almost to a person they said, I do not want to go into a nursing home. I want to stay in my own home, among my own things, in my own community for as long as possible, and if at all possible, until the day I die. The current system we have, that was built essentially in the 1980s in the Hawke government, was a system built around nursing homes. What we need to do is to re-gear the system so it's one built around supporting people to stay in their own home. The numbers, the demand for aged care services over coming years and decades really does boggle the mind. We reached a tipping point last year where, for the first time in Australia's history, there are more Australians reaching retirement age than reach working age. The retirement of the baby boomer generation is going to create extraordinary demand for aged care services, and they'll have quite different preferences and needs about the way in which those services are delivered.
I'm going to go to Kate now. You're listening to a minister talking about policy, quite a rare thing in this day and age, because, as he pointed out, there isn't a lot of appetite to listen to it. What do you say?
It sounds like a really good policy. Yeah, I think it's good. My mother's already told me she wants to live with me when she gets old, so I'll see if that ends up happening. But yeah, I think nursing homes are very depressing places. Everyone that's been to one agrees. You know, I used to visit my nana, and you know, she lived in a relatively nice one, but it was just awful. You know, she used to say, oh, they wheel me into these terrible concerts every week. I don't even want to see it. But I mean, that sounds kind of flippant. And
not the least, no, it doesn't.
Well, there are a lot of worse things going on there, almost subhuman kind of treatment of patients that were sitting there in their own piss, and you know, it happens, and I don't want to end up there. God.
Let me just I'll just go to the other side now, and here we go, talking about a policy that perhaps you could get some bipartisan support for. What do you say?
I think it's an incredibly important policy, and I'm very happy to get onto it in one second. The only reason that we've been talking about a whole range of other
When you
issues...
say 1 second, you don't really mean that, do you?
Well, 1 second, I do mean it. Well, 2, 3... The only reason we've actually been talking about other issues is not some grand conspiracy theory because people want to talk about the leadership. It's actually people on your own side, Mark, who are actually briefing the journalists.
Okay, but
to
hang on. Amazingly, we got on to talking about a policy.
Well, I'm very happy to talk about aged care because this is one of the really big challenges.
Do you support this policy you're listening to?
Well, it sounds good in terms of focusing on giving people choice in aged care. The Productivity Commission did a very, very good report last year in about August, and the government has picked up on a number of the recommendations made by the report. We know that the government has announced their $3.7 billion package. Only around about $577 million of that, of course, is new money. We think it's good that they've actually brought into focus dementia as one of the issues of national priority. However, this was an issue of national priority in 2004. We think it should never have fallen off the agenda. So I think there are things on which we can agree. We do agree it's important to properly fund it.
In 2004?
We believe... That's right, in 2004...
It fell off the agenda then?
Well, no, sorry, it was on the agenda for us.
No.
It fell off the agenda when the Labor Party actually came into office. It was an issue of national priority for us then. So the short answer is I do agree that this is an important issue. We need to fund it properly, and we need to look at the detail because a lot of that detail hasn't yet been announced, and absolutely this is the sort of issue that should receive bipartisan support because it lives beyond the life of one government.
Thank you for that. Next question comes from Andrew Cusack. Sorry, I'm racing along because we're running out of time. Where's Andrew? There he is.
I've been an independent mortgage broker since 2003 when there was much more healthy competition in the lending market. Since the global financial crisis, I've seen a growing dominance from the 4 major banks who now represent around 82% of the mortgage market within Australia. Given the borderline obscene profits of the major banks and their reluctance to toe the line with the Reserve Bank, choosing to blame increased funding costs, which is dubious at best, what needs to change to ensure that genuine borrowers can get a fair go?
Mark Bouris.
Well, I think just because the big four banks control the mortgage market, and by the way, you're right, they control 82% of the stock of all mortgages and probably about 95% of all new business, the flow of mortgages. I don't think that borrowers aren't getting a fair go. But what we do need to do is in terms of pricing, how the banks price, we need to bring in more competitors. That's the only way you can deal with the banks. People keep talking about regulating the banking system, taxing the banking system. None of that works. The only way to fix this problem is bringing in more competitors. There's nothing that is more sensitive to someone who owns a market than a new person coming and starting to compete with them on price. And the only way we're going to get new competitors in the environment is to take away from some of the big banks some of those great things that have been given. Like, for example, if I said to you, your money's going to go on deposit with the Commonwealth Bank, but you're no longer going to get the government guarantee, but you could go down to the credit union down the road and we're going to give you the government guarantee with the credit union. You may well consider that I should go down to the credit union because I'm going to get a government guarantee. So take away from the big banks some of those goodies that the government's been giving them and give those things to the smaller non-banks, to the regional banks and to the credit unions and help them build up a fifth pillar, a collective fifth pillar of a whole lot of people, a whole lot of small institutions who can become bigger and more viable to take on the big four banks.
Mark Butler, fifth pillar.
Fifth pillar. Look, I mean, I think the small lenders have been growing their market share. They still have a very small, share of the total market, but they've been growing their market share as far as I've seen pretty well, and about twice as fast as the major four, as far as I can tell. I think people were tolerant of the banks absorbing some of the Reserve Bank rate cuts immediately after the GFC because their borrowing costs went up because of the global turmoil. But I think people are very grumpy about them doing that again, and rightly so, because borrowing costs are easing, the Reserve Bank tells us, and the profits, as you say, are very robust, to put a
So what about, to take the argument Mark Bouris has just made, what about taking away some of the advantages the government actually gives the big four and extending to have a fifth pillar?
Well, our focus has been on extending choice so that people aren't locked into the big four bank mortgages if they think they're going to get a better deal down the road. Now that means banning exit fees, particularly on new mortgages. By the end of this year there will be about 1 million mortgages without exit fees, so that if you don't think you're getting a good deal with one of the big four you're with, you can go to one of the smaller lenders. The smaller lenders are often charging significantly lower interest rates, which over a period of years can add up to many thousands of dollars.
Kate Miller-Heidke, what does this argument about banks and mortgages mean to you?
I just tuned out for a little while, but I have to say that the thing is that, like, we hear all the time about interest rates, and I'm a musician, nearly all of my friends are musicians, and the truth is that they couldn't even get a mortgage if they wanted one. And I think there's a lot of people out there that couldn't even imagine the day where they could afford a deposit for a house, let alone bitching about mortgage interest rates. So that's my perspective.
Graham, I'd just like to hear Graham Richardson on that. That is a fundamental difference since you were in government, isn't it? I mean, the fact that people could... A lot of people now just giving up the idea of owning a home.
Oh, yeah, although one would imagine that, especially there's another report today suggesting that there's a real estate bubble that's going to burst even further. I don't know if that's right or not, but I just get back to I don't agree that you can't do anything with the banks. As an example, for the people that you're talking about, Kate, one would imagine that these 20% interest rates on credit cards are a disaster, because if the fridge breaks down, you still need a fridge whether you own or rent. And people go out and put on credit cards and they get hit with 20% interest rates. People who don't have a big quid. If I was the government and I wanted to...
Unless the union provides you with a credit card.
Yeah, but in a nation of 22 million, that might have been really good for 10 of them. But for the other 21 million, etc., I don't think it's really relevant. And I think for them, you would have a government to stand up and fight. And I would take the banks on that. And I think if this Labor government did that, then this story about it, they've got Labor values would look a lot better. I'd take them on. Have a go.
Kate makes a really good point, though. I mean, the idea of home ownership is not an idea that's really as available to Gen Y and younger as it was to Gen X and baby boomers. We've seen that the Housing Research Institute published some research late last year, I think, that indicated by 2050 only 2% of 65-year-olds will own their own home. Today that's 78%, and it'll be about 2% by 2050. This is a major, major change to some of our fundamental pillars about a secure retirement, and it's significantly because housing prices have gone up so high that Gen Y finds it very hard to break into it.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. That's all we have time for. Please thank our panel: Mark Bouris, Mark Butler, Kate Miller-Heidke, Kelly O'Dwyer and Graham Richardson. And Kate, that's your cue. OK, next week with the budget on the table, Q&A is joined by the Finance Minister, Penny Wong, the Shadow Treasurer, Joe Hockey, economist and businesswoman, Judith Sloan, and the founder of Crikey shareholder activist, Stephen Mayne. Well, it's been a disturbing week in politics, and we'll close tonight with a disturbing true story set to angelic music by Kate Miller-Heidke. Until next week's Q&A, good night.
1997, Livid Festival. Me and Sarah, my best friend, stripy tights and fairy wings. Safe as safe can be. We drank the gin we'd snuck in, danced to Ben Folds 5. I turned around to Sarah, couldn't see her anywhere. Safe as safe can be. Oh, Sarah, I didn't mean to let you down, but you left me on my own. Sarah, why didn't you scream? I went to all the stages and to the St. John's stand. The man said you just missed her. Stay, maybe she'll come back again. I sat and watched the crowds. My father came at midnight. We searched till 4:30. I was half hysterical. My father wasn't sure. He called for the police. let you down, but you left me on my own. Sarah, why didn't you scream? Why didn't you shout? Why didn't you shout? The next day the sergeant found her blue dress in the creek. Her parents were so angry, they put the blame on me. And then a fortnight later, Sarah knocked upon their door. Her mother asked her, where have you been? And she said, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I can't remember anything at all. Sarah, I didn't mean to let you down, but you left me on my own. Sarah, why didn't you scream? Why didn't you shout? Sarah, I hated that I let you down, but you left me on my own. Sarah, why didn't you scream? Why didn't you shout?
If you'd like to join the Q&A audience and ask a question, register now at abc.net.au/Q&A or call the number on your screen.